Okay, this is a Walther PPX video, and it's going to cover safety, the basic rules of safety. Not an exhaustive list by any means. So there's just really three rules that NRA looks at that are three main rules. The first ones are to keep the gun pointed in a safe direction at all times. So you don't, even when you think it's unloaded, you really ought not to be pointing at stuff, especially people that you don't want to shoot. You know, and secondly, you keep your finger off the trigger until it's time and you've decided to shoot. Um, or in the case of, you're about to shoot. So you're prepping the trigger. You're telling Mr. Bad Guy to stop what he's doing. He doesn't stop what he's doing. He continues to threaten you or whatever. Bang. But your finger is off the trigger when you're doing things like reloads, right? Or malfunction clearance drills. Your finger's off the trigger when you're transitioning a long ways between targets, running or whatever else it is that you might be required to do. So what we're talking about there is just to make sure that, as you're drawing, you're not putting your finger inside the trigger guard until you're basically pointed already at the target. And you may be in there and starting to prep the trigger as you're going forward, because we're talking combat. If there's a threat that's too immediate, you can shoot from this close way. You can shoot from here. There's not a problem shooting from here. You just have to intend to do so. So your finger's outside the trigger until you've decided to, you're basically needing to shoot. You're not unnecessarily just, waving the gun around. Your fingers, naturally sitting on the trigger. It doesn't need to be, so therefore it's out of the gun. And it's up alongside the, really even, it's not down here. It's up alongside the frame or the slide, somewhere where we can actually, if you can imagine, I can see through that trigger guard from both sides to see that you're not in there. It makes other people feel more comfortable about it than if you're just kind of doing whatever you're doing and your fingers on the trigger all the time. So the third rule is to keep the gun unloaded when it's not in use. So we're talking about a combat pistol. A lot of the time it's in use like 24/7 unless you're cleaning it or you're dry practicing with it, right? So, and sometimes like my guns, maybe they're sitting in my gun safe, but they're a backup gun. They're going to be loaded. So understand what condition your gun is in, always able to check it and make sure that it's empty when you want it to be empty, and make sure you know that it's loaded when it's supposed to be loaded. And when it's not in use, that's universally, when you're cleaning the gun, it's not in use. You need to be already unloaded on that thing. And then when you're dry practicing, as we discussed and we'll discuss in another video, that's when you need to also not have any ammunition in or near the gun. And so that the gun is not in shooting use, defensive use, or anything else. It's actually, the use of it right there is either not, or like under cleaning, or it's for dry practice. So that's definitely where you want to have it unloaded. And you have to understand that you're treating the gun as if it was loaded at all times and not pointing it unnecessarily at things that you don't want to shoot. And so that minimizes your problems. And then, of course, keeping your finger off the trigger, and then understanding what condition that gun is in, and then no matter what, you're still treating it like it was loaded. So that's how the accident rate or negligent discharge rate and the injury rate in this country has gone down basically every year since 1911, and it's because of training on the guns instead of safety features on them. Obviously, the Glock has come out, and this one right here doesn't have any safety on it. And it's because people are a little more conscientious, and they're getting good training and getting pretty standardized training on how to operate the gun safely, and the safety rules that they're being taught are really quite useful. So again, finger off the trigger, keep it pointed in a safe direction, and then when you're not using it, when it's not for defensive purposes, or you're cleaning it, or you're using it for dry practice, whatever, or shipping it, that thing needs to be unloaded. You need to know how to load and unload that pistol. Read the manual, watch the videos. But those are the three, and they're going to be in effect at all times. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about pointing in a safe direction. People don't, they're thinking I'm shooting, and then, something comes in the way. Oh, I get the gun up out of the way. That's fine. That's what you're supposed to be doing. But it's not when you're actually shooting that tends to be the problem. People will be taking care of a malfunction, and they'll have the gun pointed like down the bench at the range, they totally lose track of the muzzle. They're looking at something on the gun, and they're not looking where the gun's pointing. And in the case of a malfunction, you can't get the gun to fire, and you're trying to get it to fire, and so you're trying to get around in there, and you're pointing it at people, so it's really bad. Another situation is you're loading the gun, you drop the magazine on the ground or whatever, and you reach down for the magazine or the ammunition. Now you're not thinking about your gun, you think about picking up whatever fell on the ground, and the gun ends up pointed somewhere else, behind you, or you lose track of the muzzle somewhere, and you're not watching it, and that's where you get to start pointing the gun in the wrong direction. And you think about it, a person is shooting, they change a magazine or whatever, and they kind of put their finger back down in the trigger guard, then they drop the magazine. You got a perfect storm coming up where this is where these things happen. Another instance where things happen is people are looking at a gun, and they're showing off the features of the gun or whatever, and they're just losing track of that muzzle while they're showing that off, and their friends are on the other side of this muzzle, and here it is just crossing over in front of them all the time. People are wondering about me pointing it at the camera. You have to understand that no one is actually in the area that I'm in, or even in the room, or even within 50 feet or more of where I am, and this is just a camera sitting there. So people are like, whoa, he's pointing his gun at the cameraman. Well, the cameraman is R2-D2, so we can't worry too much about him, or maybe one of those new Star Wars ones, but I don't care. So you do have to realize that pointing it in a safe direction, generally, in the trigger thing, it always happens when you're losing track and you're doing something more and other than actually shooting, or you're thinking about something else, and you just lose track of that gun. You need to train yourself to keep track of the muzzle at all times, and because you kind of can't be outside of yourself looking in, sometimes it's other people that are going to have to point that out to you. And sometimes they're not very nice about it, sometimes they really love to do that, but what you need to be is humble and realize that you made a mistake and it's a learning opportunity. And we're just hoping that nobody gets shot while you're learning, and that's why we have other people watching you giving the minimum training. Then after that, you're reinforcing that training and not doing bad habits. So that's a safety one. It's kind of one of my longer videos, but it's very necessary.